Welcome to Flynn Dog Woodwork. This is Bryan. You just caught me doing one of my favorite morning routines, and that's eating a biscuit while listening to Limp Biscuit next to my new biscuit joiner. Let me tell you a little bit more about this biscuit joiner. So you may be asking, why in the heck would you buy a biscuit joiner when you already have a domino joiner? And that's a great question. The answer is, I've been going through a lot of old woodworking books, and I've been finding some old forgotten jigs where we can use the biscuit joiners to do a variety of other things. So let's open this box, see what's inside, and I'll show you exactly the jig I'm talking about. So first of all, this is the absolute cheapest biscuit joiner I could find online. It's made by a reputable manufacturer of Wen, and it's an 8.5 amp biscuit joiner. Now I purchased this on Amazon.com, but I'm sure you could find it in other places. As a reminder, I'm going to place all the tools I'll be using in this video in the link in the description below. So check those out if you're interested in learning more. So let's open this box and see what comes inside the packaging. So first off, I'm absolutely stunned at this packaging. I had no idea that it actually came in a carrying case, so that's really nice. Okay, so inside we have your standard trash, and we have the actual biscuit joiner. It looks like it's about the same construction as a domino joiner, so it's something I should be familiar with. It also comes with a number of biscuits to get you started. There's also a little tool here that we'll figure out what the use for is later. As always with these tools, it comes with a very remedial dust collection, which I'm sure we can actually attach our Festool to as well. For those of you that use the Festool dust collection, it doesn't appear that this will actually fit without an adapter to the Festool dust collection hose. So you may be asking at this point, what the heck is he going to use this for? Well, let me show you in my book. So this is what we're going to build today. It's actually a corner spline jig that allows you to use your biscuit joiner to cut those splines. So let's get started and see if it will work with this Wen biscuit joiner. So let's talk about the layout of this jig. The first thing we want to do is to figure out where the base plate of this actual joiner lies on our MDF. And we want to make sure it's completely square to this actual MDF piece. So I've laid out my square here, and I'm going to align it so that it's nice and secure. The next thing we want to do is to make sure that the joiner is completely centered within the workpiece. And since we're at 20 inches long, we know that's right at 10 inches. Now that we have all those measurements made, we can pencil in everything so that we can start the process of getting everything laid out. So the first thing I'm going to do is to take that 10-inch marking and create a center line down the piece of the board. Now that we have a perfect center line down the jig, we can now work on centering our actual joiner onto the workpiece and striking a line around the actual edge of the joiner. So now I'll simply trace around the base plate, and this will give us an idea of where we need to place our brackets to hold our joiner in line. So this X right here indicates the center of the board intersected with the actual center of the joiner. So we're going to take that line and we're going to strike two 45-degree angles on either side. To do that, I'm going to improvise a little bit by using this delve square and the straight edge. Okay, so with both of these lines struck, it gives us a reference point to put two supportive brackets on either side to support the workpiece as you put it in at that 90-degree angle. So now I'm going to cut two pieces of scrap wood and mount it directly on these lines so that it gives the workpiece something to be supported against. Because I'm super fancy and this is all I have laying around, I'm going to use this 3/4 inch walnut plywood and cut it into 1-inch strips. Okay, so we're back at the jig, and we know that this corner right here is at exactly 90 degrees. Now all that's left to do is to take these two pieces and glue and tack them onto these corresponding lines to create that support feature for the workpiece. Alright, now that we have our support brackets in place, it's time to work on the mounting of the actual joiner. So in securing the joiner, there's actually two spots that we need to worry about. First off, we need to make sure that the joiner has support on the front end, so when we're pushing the joiner forward, it has something to rest against. On the sides, we also need to worry about having support, as we don't want our joiner to move from side to side as we're pushing it through the workpiece. Another thing that we have to consider is we need to have a little bit of height on either side of the joiner so that we can create splines at any height we would like. So I've thought about this for a little bit, and I think I'm going to use two 4x4s to create support on either side. I will have to joint these and plane these to get them perfectly square, but that's okay. Next up, for the front edge, I'm going to cut these same 4x4s at a 45-degree angle and butt it up right against the plate of the joiner so that it will give all the support we need as we're pushing our joiner forward. So let's get started on that. So first up, I've got these two pieces of scrap 4x4. I'm going to run it through this joiner and make sure I've got two completely flat sides that are perfectly perpendicular to one another. Then we're going to take it over to the table saw and flatten out the other two sides. So let's get started on that. All right, now that we have our perpendicular edges, let's go head over to the table saw. So over at the table saw, I actually had an idea, believe it or not.
I just had an idea.
We actually don't need to straighten out the other two sides. Since this is perfectly perpendicular on these two sides, one side will be resting against the bottom of the jig, and the other side will be resting against the joiner. So it's really not necessary to flatten out the other two sides. What I will do now is cut it down to size so that we can actually attach it to our jig. So let's do that. So over at our jig, I've got the piece that will be attached to either side of the joiner, and what I want to do is to make sure that it's perfectly aligned with the top of the actual joiner. Once I've got that in line, I can then go to the bottom of the workpiece and strike a line so that we can cut two even pieces. The next piece that we jointed, which will give support to the front of the joiner, just needs to be cut at 45-degree angles so that we can slide it into this 45-degree angle slot. So let's go over to the miter saw and make some of these cuts. So the first cut that we're going to make is for the two sides. So all we have to do is align the kerf of the blade right down the center and make the cut. So for the next piece that we're going to cut two 45-degree angles into this workpiece so that we can slide it into those two slots that will support the front. Now that we have the two 45-degree angles cut, we can slice right down the middle. And here are our two wedges that we'll use to support the actual front of the joiner. So now we're back over at the jig, and I wanted to do a dry fit to see how everything was lining up. And there's a couple of issues that I actually encountered. One is this dust port will actually interfere with this block. So I'll need to cut this down so that it doesn't interfere with the actual dust port. The second issue that I ran into is this actual support piece, which gives you support as you're using the joiner on angles and other things when you're joining tables. But we won't be using that for this, so we can actually take this off. So let's go ahead and cut down this piece so that it will fit with the actual dust port, and then we can move on. Alright, so back to the jig. Now I did encounter one last issue. You can see how the layout will look once we get it all fitted together. But there's actually a depth knob right here that's actually interfering with the actual support bracket. So I'm just going to run over the table saw and cut into this wood just a little bit to give some space for the actual depth finder to fit into. So let me do that right now. So I just marked it out, and now let's go to the table saw. So over at the crosscut sled, I'm simply going to raise my blade until I get the appropriate depth. Once I have that, I'll run it through the table saw, and we'll make sure we have that piece notched out. So now that we have all our pieces cut out, it's simply a matter of aligning it all together and making sure that everything fits correctly. And you can see with that notch cut out, it fits nicely over on the right-hand side of this joiner. So now, in order to get all these pieces locked down to our jig, I'm going to be using some CA glue in combination with some wood glue. Our CA glue will give us that quick bond that we're looking for, and the wood glue will give us that long-lasting bond. So let's go ahead and start doing that. All right, so let's test out this fit here. You can see that the joiner fits very nicely into this groove and it allows us to push our blade into the workpiece so that we can create those perfect splines in our miters. The next thing we want to do is to cut out some pieces that we can place in here so that we can raise the height of the joiner if we actually want to create splines that are a little bit higher than the bottom layer. So the first thing we need to do is to measure the width, and we're at 5 3/8 of an inch. The depth is approximately 7 inches long. So we're going to cut some blanks that are 5 3/8 inches wide and 7 inches long that can fit in here, that we can place our joiner on top so that we can create splines a little bit higher than the bottom layer. So let's go ahead and do that. So over at the table saw, I have my width set here at 5 3/8. Let's run this piece of plywood through a couple of times so that we can get our appropriate width. Now this should be able to give us a couple of blanks, so let's go ahead and cut this down to 7 inches long. So since this doesn't have to be precise, I'm simply going to measure 7 inches from either side so that we can have 2 blanks for our jig. Now we can simply cut through it. Now that we have our blanks, let's see how they fit in the jig. So now that we have our blanks, you can see that they fit very nicely into the jig and provide that elevation for the joiner so you can hit higher level splines. Now these don't have to be exactly perfect. Really all you're looking for is to raise the joiner up so that you can create a spline just at a higher level. So let's go take a look at a miter joint and see what these splines look like. So here I've created a rough miter. We're going to place it into the jig and create 2 splines, one at the top and one at the bottom. We're going to create the one at the bottom first, then we're going to flip it over and create the second one. So let's give it a test and see how it works. Now that was extremely smooth. I was really impressed with that. The joiner simply sliced through that miter joint and created 2 splines at the top and the bottom. Now you can see why we made those elevators so that we could create splines that were a little bit higher in the workpiece. So let's put a couple of those elevators in place and see how those work. And that looks just about perfect. So now let's cut some thin strips of wood, place them in here, flush cut them, and sand them down and see how they look. So the first thing I need to do is to see how thick that joiner cuts. So if I take my calipers and I place it between the actual cuts, we can see that we're just under 2/10 of an inch. So we'll need to cut our splines approximately that thickness. So let's get started. So now I'm very carefully going to cut these thin strips. And I'm not even going to cut the whole way through. I'm just going to get enough so that I can create a couple of splines. If I place it into the spline, it's a nice tight fit, so I'm very pleased with that. So let me cut a couple of pieces here. We'll flush cut it and sand it down and see how it looks. So now that we have our splines, I can simply take all 4 and place them into the slots and let them dry. Now that those splines are fully seated, we'll let them dry. So off camera, I took my miter over to the bandsaw and cut off the excess. Now it's simply a matter of sanding it down and seeing what we got. So for not being a perfect miter to start off, I am really pleased with these splines, especially for something that came off a biscuit joiner. I'm going to splash a little bit of water on this so you can see the color contrast. I used walnut for the splines because that's what I had as scrap, so you won't be able to see the huge contrast that you may be expecting. However, there is some sapwood in this walnut, so hopefully you can get the gist. All right guys, so here's the big reveal. Now hopefully you can see that, but I absolutely love those splines. What a great job. So I don't know about you guys, but I'm super impressed with this jig. This is something that I just literally read in a book and I wasn't quite sure if it would even work, but this thing has exceeded my expectations. Now when I'm ever making splines, I'm going to be using this biscuit joint from here on out. So thanks for joining me today and following me through a build of a spline jig made with a biscuit joiner. This thing blew my mind. I guess it is true what they say. You can teach a new dog old tricks. So let's keep an open mind and let's thumb through some of those old woodworking books. I'm sure there's a lot of treasures out there that we've simply forgotten about. Today's been awesome and I've really enjoyed this build and I hope you did too. Until next time, take care. Well, I hope you enjoyed watching this biscuit joiner spline jig. I know I really enjoyed making it and I hope you learned a little bit along the way. If you haven't already, I'd love to get your subscription and leave a like. Also hit that notification bell so you can be informed when future videos come out. Also, I'll leave links in the description for all the tools that we used in today's videos. Thanks again for watching, and until I see you next time, take care.